So let's put some of the Grotmust attachments through their paces and talk through 7 fairly terrifying damage combos from Warhammer 40K's new rules. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I thought it could be fun to take a look at a bunch of different damage dealers and just talk through a selection of power combos from a bunch of the new detachments, where if you put a big investment into a unit just to see exactly how much damage it can do against a bunch of targets and hopefully blast a whole load of enemy off the table or cut them down in melee. There's definitely a ton of good stuff to choose from all these detachments. I thought I'd just take a look at 7 other things that caught my interest, so feel free to let me know any others that you've been eyeing up or you've made use of on the tabletop already. First up, I thought we'd start with the Orc Flash Gitz from the Taktikal Brigade. They definitely seem like some of the scariest Dakar around now, and that detachment really does look like it takes a pretty good unit already and makes them stand out great. Flash Gitz are 80 points per 5 of them, and you can take 10 in a squad. They've got the profile of Knobs with a toughness 5, 2 wounds and a 4+ save, which I think isn't terrible for their 16 point cost, but their damage profiles are just quite good at mauling enemy infantry. Their Snaz guns get them 3 shots at strength 6, AP 1, damage 2, going up to 4 shots within half range. They get sustained hits and lethal hits once per game as well. They can then follow that up with a charge, which is fairly fearsome for a unit that looks more like a shooting one. 20 attacks at strength 5, AP 1, damage 1 will certainly leave a big dent in most lighter enemy infantry. They do get some at least fairly regular play jumping out of transports in Warhorde, though the Tactical Brigade really seems to take them to the next level. For this one, the Tactical Brigade is the mainly Commandos and Stormboys Blood Axe focused one that gets the Orky orders. The one that the Flash Gits care most about is getting a +1 to hit at range. They can have a boss or a mech yell that at them, and that means that they can be hitting on a 4+ when they're moving around, which they're usually going to have to do to get line of sight or be jumping out of transports or something. For the most obvious combo for them, that's going to be given by a big mech with a shock attack gun, who's 105 points after he takes the rather good mech captain enhancement, as that boosts his normal reroll 1s to hit all the way up to rerolling all failed hits. So that basically means that given the squad's hitting on a 4+ anyway, that means they'll be hitting 3/4 of the time with all that Dakar now. And he also chips in with his fairly punchy shock attack gun profile, really quite random, but strength 9, AP 4 and damage D6 fire. There's at least a pretty good chance that you get a few wounds with really high AP and good damage, which could help handle some of the targets that the Flash Gits might struggle against. As a result, if they jump out of a truck and the mech yells the order at them, then they can be getting 40 attacks at strength 6, AP 1, damage 2, or hitting on a 4+, re-rolling with lethal hits and sustained hits at the same time, plus all of that on the shock attack gun profile. For their average damage output for that, you kill around about 32 Tyrannid Termagants more or less, around 18 Space Marines out of cover or 13 within, 6 Terminators or 4 in cover, which is pretty impressive given that they'll be saving on a 2+ against most of the unit there. The volume fire is kind of immense. Against a toughness 10 3+ save vehicle, they'll do around about 26 wounds or so, or 14 wounds to a mighty Land Raider, so falling a little bit short of killing that, and struggling a fair bit more if it's in cover, but I'd class that as a fairly suboptimal target. Basically, there's a good deal of units that they will just absolutely demolish, and they can split fire several different ways if it makes sense to. And then that might be only half the story for the damage output, as they could double down on that with a charge, so 40 strength 5 attacks, or the AP 1 damage 1, maybe with a buff with a stratagem if it makes sense to. And then if they either kill their charge target or they're not able to charge, they could be very easily overwatching next turn. And between the sustained hits and the full unrestricted rerolls, they average 24 hits at strength 6, AP 1 and damage 2, or for just 1 command point with overwatch. That's going to be wiping out a good number of medium-sized infantry units, and probably sacking a whole bunch of worthwhile damage on tougher stuff too, if that's the only option. They can't even be locked in combat as well, given that there's a fall back and shoot stratagem. Overall, these guys do look pretty terrifying. Not enormously hard to kill when they actually get focused with damage, but after that massive punch and potentially an overwatch or a charge as well, they might well have already done enough to justify their existence and hopefully killed a bunch of important stuff, never mind what the rest of the list is doing at the same time. Next up, I thought we'd talk about some Krootox Rampagers from the Auxiliary detachment. The Krootox Rampagers are the Kroot Cavalry, 95 points per 3 of them now, so a fair bit cheaper than they were, and that gets you 15 wounds at toughness 6 with a 5+ save, a 7-inch move and a 7-inch scout move, and when they attack they each get a few pistol and javelin shots, but then a sort of mixed melee profile, 3 attacks at strength 4, AP 1, damage 1 with the lance keyword, and then some Rampager Fist for 4 more attacks with sustained hits at strength 6, AP 1, damage 2. They also get a line breaker special rule where for each one that you make into engagement range, you roll a dice and on a 4+, you deal D3 mortal wounds as well. which could help them out against tougher stuff. Their main weakness is they don't really have the biggest movement in the world, and even with Scout to get them somewhere scary, they might struggle to get into the targets they really want to. Having to move around terrain for mounted units is a bit of a pain. The auxiliary cadre detachment though definitely does a whole load of good stuff for them. It seems to be fairly focal on supporting them. It's got stratagem options for advance and charge, and potentially doubling down for 2 CP on 6-inch advances as well if you really want it, plus the option to fall back and charge, which is quite nice with their special rule. Though for this one I thought it would be interesting to see the sheer amount of damage for them that they could do with combining the 2 damage dealer stratagems at once. There's a 1 command point stratagem for extra AP on an auxiliary unit, and another 1 command point 1 for reroll or wound rolls, and they seem like a bit of a dangerous match. And then there'll be a lone operative lone spear lurking somewhere in the back with a sniper rifle to ping their targets for reroll or hit rolls. If you can get an 190 point unit of them into something worthwhile, they'll get 42 attacks, rerolling all hits, all with AP 2 and either damage 1 or damage 2, and then all re-rolling the wound rolls as well. And for the calculation I've assumed that 3 gets to roll for the mortal wounds. In reality quite a lot of the time they're going to screen each other a bit. For their theoretical big damage though, you could get 44 termagants, 22 space marines, 8 terminators, around 30 odd wounds to a toughness 10 3+ save vehicle, or a massive 16 wounds to a land raider, potentially being a Kroot unit that could down about one of the biggest and scariest tanks out there. You would fall a bit short if it used Armour of Contempt though. Against the majority of targets with those kind of numbers though, you wouldn't need all of those 3 buffs, and maybe you could just get by with the reroll hit rolls and add in one or the other of the stratagems as it makes sense to. Or you potentially might need the stratagems just to get them there in the first place with the advance and charge or something. Certainly feels like a unit that the opponent just absolutely couldn't ignore as a counter-charge style threat though. It's kind of crazy that even 3 of these, if you just half one of the sets of these numbers, could still easily destroy something really significant if you did put some maximal buffs on them. Before we move on, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor in Weyland Yutani terrain, who are one option for some functional competitive style Warhammer 40K terrain, if you were looking to set up a battlefield that you could play WTC games or similar on. Their style terrain is made of lightweight but sturdy plastic, and you've got a bunch of different designs that the pieces come in, but their focus is a little bit more on function over form, basically having pieces for good line of sight blocking and defined bases and things, so you can play quite a clear and functional game of 40k. They've got a few good options for whole table sets or smaller things. They've got this War Master GT pack, which I think is quite a well balanced table, 4 big ruins, 6 small ones and some armoured containers. They've got a Pariah Nexus pack for the current WTC terrain pack there. They have a bigger emphasis on the big ruins and some sort of Girder Forest type things. Plus just a set of 4 3-story ruins, which could just be quite nice to make a standard 40k battlefield with some other terrain a little bit more functional perhaps. Nice to have things that can hide the biggest stuff around. In any case, thanks to them for sponsoring this one. You can find them links down in the video description. Moving on, let's talk some Imperial Guard next. And for their detachment they got Scions that can hit very hard indeed. For this one I thought we'd combine the Militarum Tempestus command squad, which can drop in or jump out of a transport and deal out an order, can get you sustained hits 1 from the Tempestor. And then just for this one, for maximal damage we're going to be loading up on the special weapons, though for some practical games it might be a bit better to swap out some of those for some of the upgrades. For this one they're going to be combining with a squad of Tempestus Scions all loaded up in a Orks Prime. The Scions add the rule of reroll 1s to hit or reroll all hit rolls on an objective, plus another couple of special weapons, maybe a melter and plasma, and the Orks Prime can get them where they need to be and then jump out for full wound rerolls. Finally, for this specially sanctioned damage mission, we've also got a Primaris Psyker added in. Tempestus Scions have the datasheet rule where you can attach more than one character to them, provided no more than one of them is a command squad. The Scion layered buffs do get kind of crazy, and all of that's just very nasty when it applies to an extra D3 plus 3 shots, or at strength 6, AP 2, damage 2 with devastating wounds, and even blast for a few more shots against infantry. Then between the rest of the squad we've got 2 melter guns, 2 plasma guns, a grenade launcher and a hotshot volley gun, 2 plasma pistols and 2 hotshot lasguns. You definitely could do a few other combos. Basically though, with those stats buffs, you get +1 to wound when you've jumped out of a transport from the detachment rule, reroll all wound rolls against the Orks Prime's target, reroll 1s to hit from the Scion squad, sustained hits 1 from the command squad, and also the +1 to hit order. You might not need that so much if you were targeting something or an objective and had the full hit rerolls. In any case, rolling through all those damage profiles would take a bit of time, but if the Orks rumbles them up and delivers them into 12-inch range and then pings their target with something, but I've not even included the Orks' damage output here, the squad itself kills around about 25 termagants, around 15 space marines, 6 slain enemy terminators, around about a massive 29 wounds to a toughness 10 3+ save vehicle, or around 17 to a land raider. If you think that cover is going to be a major factor, you've got pretty easy access to ignore cover, either via a Hellhound or a Stratagem in the detachment. And if you really wanted to go to the absolute maximum, you could coordinate with a Leman Russ Exterminator elsewhere on the board. Though to be honest, against most normal targets, you're probably getting into overkill at that point. Overall, that's pretty scary stuff for 190 points worth of unit. They should be having a very good chance to just instantly kill their points back against the right scary thing, and could potentially do a bit of split fire if it made sense to, with different damage profiles going into different things, though only some of them would get the rerolls to wound from the Aurochs Prime in that case. Next up, and looking over at the Admech, we've got the Kataphron Breachers. They've often been one of the central damage dealer units, maybe a little bit less used in the Skitarii Hunter cohort given that they don't have synergies with that, but elsewhere they tend to be a bit of a staple. They're 160 points for 3 of them, not really all that impressive on the defensive stats for that cost, but they do have really quite scary damage, a heavy arc rifle that's 2 shots out to 30-inch range, at strength 8, AP 2 and damage 3 with anti-vehicle 4+, but they each get 4 shots within 15-inch range, and in melee they can be fairly scary as well with a hydraulic claw. That profile in itself isn't exactly massive, 460 points, but they can layer a bunch of buffs on it, either getting the Protector or Conqueror Doctriner for a big damage boost in one way or another, and perhaps more importantly, being within 6 inches of a battle line unit for flat out full rerolls to hit, so they should be converting most of those shots. Then in the Haloscreed detachment, there's a couple of other really quite scary things that you can add into the equation. They're often led by a Tech Priest Manipulus anyway. He can give them lethal hits and also a single turn of a 4+ invulnerable save that doesn't hurt. But in this one he can take the enhancement for having both Conqueror and Protector Doctriners at the same time. Protector will give them +1 ballistic skill, Conqueror will give them extra AP, and they'll also be able to advance and shoot, so should have better options for where to apply all that firepower. +1 weapon skill if they happen to get into combat, so hitting on 3s there, though if it makes more sense just to sit and shoot for a turn, they could be hitting on 2s re-rolling. If they do go moving up the board though, if they make them one of their Halo units, they can advance and charge potentially. That's kind of intimidating for their normally slow profile, or being able to advance, shoot and charge with all that stacked damage. And then finally there's a 1 command point stratagem that gives you critical hits on 5s. So basically every single 5+ that these guys get will get a lethal hit, and that's very big against monsters in particular, which they're usually a bit weak against. If they can use their advance and shoot to get within 15 inches, their arc rifles alone, not counting the Manipulus, get 20 Termagants, around about 16 Space Marines between the boosted AP and all the hit rerolls, around 9 Space Marine Terminators, so extra good, and they don't care about cover with that due to the good AP, around a massive 40 wounds to 3+ save vehicles, or around 32 wounds to a Land Raider out of cover, though it seems that mathematically even not even cover and Armour of Contempt would save it on average. After all that, they could also go on to charge as well. If they can manage to stay closer and coordinate with the battle line, they'd have 11 hits on average at strength 8, AP 3 and damage 3, plus whatever the Manipulus does, so could potentially just take out another small unit there. If they're not able to get within 15-inch range, the numbers do drop off a bit, but you're still killing basically a whole Terminator squad, or 8 Space Marines, or 20 wounds to a 3+ save vehicle. They're still very scary. And if the enemy goes moving around in front of them, they can overwatch incredibly nastily as well, given that they can just reroll everything that isn't a 6 due to battle line, and then all those 6s will be lethal hits. So if something ventures it within 15 inches of them, you could expect something along the lines of 7 automatic wounds or so, which could easily do for an enemy vehicle. It is really quite a pricey unit at 415 points though. I feel like maybe the biggest danger is that it just doesn't manage to get its teeth into something that's really big and scary enough to justify it, and they likely should be absolute target priority number 1 for the enemy, given that they're just not really all that durable for the cost, given that they're over 50 points per model, and the right firepower can certainly slim down the squad very quickly. Next up, I was interested to see what the Celestian Sacresants could do in the Champions of Faith detachment, given that basically the one good combo seemed to be to try and take them from being kind of mediocre damage to actually being fairly scary. The Sacresants don't really see too much competitive play for the Sisters at the moment though. 15 points per model basically, and choosing either between a bunch of strength 5, AP 2 and damage 1 hits with sustained hits, or the Hallowed Maces for strength 4, AP 1, damage 2 with lethals. They sort of feel like they should be the tankier Sisters, having a 4+ invulnerable save and -1 to wound if there's a character with them, but their points cost is just a bit high for that really to be the case. I feel like they wouldn't have been a terrible idea to keep at their 2+ save characteristic that they had back in 9th. In any case, it's interesting to see what sort of numbers they could put out if you gave them some fairly big investment. I feel like the halberds are quite good as well, though I went for the maces for this one for the damage 2 to be able to threaten tougher vehicles and things a little bit more. And to a squad with that, I also added a Canoness with Blessed Blade, taking the slightly pricey +2 strength and +1 damage enhancement, making them righteous with a miracle dice, and then using a free stratagem on them for the +1 strength and +1 AP boost. The total cost of the unit is 230 points, and might be kind of hard to deliver into combat unfortunately, due to needing to be out of transport to trigger the detachment rule. If they can catch something in melee though, then they do get a bunch of volume attacks, 27 attacks at strength 5 AP 2 damage 2 with lethal hits, or hitting on a 2+, plus another 3 from the spear at strength 6 AP 3 damage 2, and then the Canoness's attacks at strength 7 AP 3 damage 3. For average numbers, they put down around about 23 Termagants, absolutely ruined Space Marines with around about 15 of them slain, 6 enemy Terminators, 21 wounds to a toughness 9 3+ save vehicle, or around about 12 wounds to a Land Raider, so still really aren't going to be the choice for taking down the absolute toughest stuff around. I guess that one would be left to the Paragon suits. I feel like their numbers aren't awful given that you're not spending a command point here, given that you can get that free with the Canoness. It's just the miracle dice that you're investing. It might just be a little bit harder to deliver them than some though. And it's maybe a little bit disappointing that they won't be a little bit sturdier on the strike back, at least not for the 230 points invested. They do feel fairly scary against infantry units, though I feel like they'll probably still lag behind their Paragon suits with the miracle dice and using the extra AP stratagem if they wanted to. Overall, I still feel like this detachment needs a bit of a power boost, or just for Games Workshop to boost the number of miracle dice that Sisters have available again. Next up, and doing a video like this, I feel like it would have been a bit remiss not to talk about the Sternguard Veteran Mortal Wound combos. They got their rather big datasheet improvement in the balance update, with Sternguard Focus now allowing them to reroll all wound rolls when they're making attacks against the Oath of Moment targets, and Games Workshop also doubled down by giving you +1 to wound against that for core codex chapters. And as a result, it feels like these guys are just the absolute guys for the job to just demolish the Oath of Moment target, virtually whatever it is, with a massive amount of bolt shots with devastating wounds, 3 shots within 12 inches, plus getting heavy bolters with devastating wounds, and also having a bunch of volume attacks in melee and a power fist, which can also get the same buffs against the Oath of Moment targets if they follow up with a charge. In the Grotmas detachments, they can go in the Librarius Conclave, which feels like it's probably the detachment that helps them out the most. I feel like they're already okay with Librarians as they increase their durability, and the Librarian psychic powers can make good use of those wound rerolls, but the thing that makes them absolutely next level in this one is the Fusillade enhancement, where the Librarian makes his entire squad anti-monster 5+ and anti-vehicle 5+ with ranged weapons. As a result, it means that these Sternguard mortal wounds just go absolutely crazy. You can just reroll everything that isn't a 5+, and against any standard monster or vehicle target without unusual defences, you get 22 mortal wounds against them, and you can go even further than this if you take the Pyromancy buff for the army for a turn, going all the way up to 27 mortal wounds, and also their guns go into AP- for any other wounds that they happen to score with that +1 to wound. Given that the Sternguard already do anti-infantry really quite well with all those devastating wounds, and also their regular AP shots will do nicely with the +1 to wounds and the rerolls, there's a good chance that a unit like this will probably kill just about any one unit in the game, and if somehow their shooting was insufficient, they could always follow up with a charge. 36 attacks at strength 4 AP 0 damage 1 usually isn't super general purpose, but again if you're charging the Oath of Moment target you reroll hits, wounds and get +1 to wound, so you stack 24 saves against anything that's toughness 11 or lower, so even if you've got a 2+ save you probably fail a whole bunch. The Power Fist and the Librarian's Force Weapon can also leave a big mark with the same buffs too. Between Oath of Moment, shooting and melee, there's not really too much in the game that they won't one round. I believe with average dice rolls, they usually just about take down Mortarion, and should be pretty comfortably taking down most Catan, given that the vast majority of their damage is damage 1. Finally, for damage combos, we've got a Chaos Knight one that I talked about in a previous video, and this one's the twin Gatling cannon goodness of the Knight Despoiler when you feed it full of cultists. The Knight Despoiler is the more standard Chaos Knight that's built off the Questoris frame rather than their actual bespoke options, and he gets the ability to dual wield Gatling cannons plus take a 3-shot rocket pod on the top. So even at base, he's absolutely terrifying to medium infantry and things, spitting out 36 shots at strength 6, AP 2 and damage 2. In the core index attachment, he's not quite as easy to get buffs to take him out, but in the allied with Chaos Cultist type 1, he gets to be a dreaded master, and then either do D3 or D3+3 casualties to a nearby damned unit, and then either choose sustained hits 1 or lethal hits as he sees fit. With an enhancement he could have both, just turning those high rate of fire Gatling cannons into something altogether more nasty, and really quite general purpose. Overall, with average rolling, just looking at the Gatling cannons and the missile pod, One round of shooting with this guy, taking both of the buffs, does around about 28 slain termagants, around about 17 dead intercessors, almost 7 slain terminators, 21 wounds to toughness 10 vehicles, or around about 12 or 13 wounds to a land raider, obviously in chunks of 2. He's obviously just a lot more efficient against sort of infantry targets that he'd be wounding on a 4+ or better anyway, but it does just feel kind of intimidating that he can be taking massive chunks out of just about anything in the game if he is given a few turns to operate. He could also be killing a bunch of chaff up close as well with his heavy flamers if he needed to. In reality, when taking account for cover, he's not actually going to be crazily efficient against things that he's wounding on a 5+ with a 3+ save or better. He'll still usually be able to have a good shot at one-rounding a bunch of battle tanks though. I feel like he'd be the sort of Chaos Knight to handle all of the infantry type threats out there, and then to back him up with a bunch of the ever-present war dogs like the Carnivores or the Brigands, all of which can do a whole load of damage against the bigger, tougher targets like the tanks and vehicles. In any case, looking forward to your thoughts on a few fun damage combos. Let me know any other thoughts or things I might have missed on these ones. I'm sure there'll be a few slip-ups, and maybe a few options that I've overlooked that could be quite reasonable ways to increase their damage output further without overcommitting an unreasonable amount of resources. Let me know any other good ones that you've seen from the Grotmist detachments as well. I suspect there's probably enough for another video at some point if I get round to one. Finally, I'll just cycle back to Weyland Yutani terrain, as mentioned the video sponsor, with their competitive style tournament terrain, one good option for a functional 40k battlefield. For their pros and cons, they do some things really quite well. Good line of sight blocking, competitive 40k layouts, literally making the supplies for the WTC. The plastic's pretty sturdy and easy to put models in the upper floors. They come pre-coloured and go together without glue, so don't take masses of hobbying, and they can be disassembled and stored flat for when you need to transport them. As is often the case with alternative terrain sets out there, it's also far cheaper than Games Workshop. I'd say the main downside for this one is perhaps a bit of trade-off with a little immersion with not having textured terrain, plus they also do have the sort of characteristic white edges that they have, which I don't really think look too terrible, but it might bother some people more so than others. It could maybe be an option to have a bit of a mix of that and other different bits, these ones to have some function to the battlefield, and some other stuff to look good maybe. In any case, feel free to check them out, links down in the video description below. As mentioned, they've got a whole bunch of different options. It can be a very cheap and effective battlefield for Warhammer 40k. I'll leave this video here for now then. Thanks very much for listening. I'll look forward to hearing all your thoughts. Looks like I'll be back to talk about some Black Templars in the not too distant future. So stay tuned to Auspex Tactics or check back later if you'd like to see that. If you'd like to support the channel, there's the channel's Patreon page and all the affiliate discount links for buying 40k linked in the video description. A big thank you to any of you out there who are using those, but otherwise just a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.